Everyone walked past that building without a second thought. Just another government office in Mountain View, California. But on February 19, 2014, something extraordinary happened there. A 37-year-old man walked through those doors. The same doors where 18 years earlier he had stood in line as a broke teenager, waiting for food stamps so his family could eat. But today, he wasn't there to receive help. Today, he was there to sign a check, $19 billion, from Facebook, for an app he built in a garage. His name was Koum, and this is the story of how a refugee kid who swept floors for minimum wage became the man who sold the world's most popular messaging app for more money than most countries make in a year. And the craziest part, everyone told him his idea would fail. What he did next will change how you see your own struggles forever. Ukraine, 1976. A small village outside Kiev, deep in Soviet territory. Koum was born into a world that didn't want him. His family was Jewish in the Soviet Union, which meant two things were guaranteed: poverty and persecution. His father worked construction, breaking his back in the freezing cold for wages that barely kept them alive. His mother stayed home in their tiny two-bedroom house with no hot water, no phone line, and barely enough food to get through the winter. But the poverty wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the fear. In Soviet Ukraine, the government watched everything. Phone calls were monitored. Conversations were dangerous. Jan's family learned early that you whispered important things. You never said anything controversial out loud, and you definitely never trusted that your words were private. Being Jewish made it worse. They were outsiders in their own country, always suspected, always watched, always one wrong word away from serious trouble. Jan grew up knowing what it meant to have nothing. No money, no freedom, no privacy. He watched his parents work themselves to exhaustion just to survive. He saw his mother's hands crack from cold water and hard work. He felt the hunger when food ran out before the month did. But he also learned something crucial. He learned that when you have nothing, you notice everything. You notice which neighbors have more, and you figure out why. You notice patterns, systems, ways the world works that people with comfortable lives never see. Jan was a quiet kid, always watching, always thinking, always learning. And what he learned in Soviet Ukraine would shape everything he built decades later. By the time Jan was 16, his family had made a desperate decision. His grandmother had already escaped to America, and she sent letters describing a different world. A place where you could speak freely, where working hard actually led somewhere, where being Jewish didn't make you a target. Jan's mother told him and his father they were leaving. They would go to America, start over, and never look back. His father would stay behind temporarily to sell what little they had and join them later. In 1992, Koum and his mother stepped off a plane in Southern California with 2 suitcases and a dream that was about to meet brutal reality. Mountain View, California. Jan was 16 years old, spoke almost no English, and his mother spoke none at all. They moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment subsidized by the government. Refugee assistance. That's what they qualified for. His mother, who had been strong enough to leave everything behind and bring her son to a new country, couldn't find work. She couldn't speak the language, had no American job experience, and no connections. So she did what she had to do. She babysat occasionally, making a few dollars here and there. But mostly, they survived on government assistance. Food stamps. Every month, Jan and his mother would walk to that welfare office on North Wisman Road. They'd stand in line with dozens of other struggling families, waiting their turn. When they reached the window, they'd receive their food stamps. Just enough for basic groceries. Just enough to survive. Nothing more. Jan watched his mother's pride disappear a little more each month. This woman who had risked everything, who had been brave enough to cross an ocean for a better life, now had to depend on strangers' charity just to feed her son. And Jan felt every bit of it. The shame, the frustration, the determination. Standing in that line at 16 years old, surrounded by other people who had nothing, Jan made himself a promise. A promise he would keep for the rest of his life. I'm going to get us out of this. Whatever it takes, I'm going to make sure we never have to stand in this line again. He enrolled at Mountain View High School, but Jan wasn't there to make friends or play sports. He was there to survive and learn English and figure out his next move. After school every day, he got a job sweeping floors at a grocery store. $5 an hour, minimum wage. He'd come home exhausted, smelling like cleaning supplies and floor wax, but he'd hand his mother the cash. $20, $30, $40 a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. It meant maybe they could buy something other than the cheapest possible food. It meant his mother didn't have to feel quite so helpless. But Jan wasn't just sweeping floors. At night, while other teenagers were hanging out with friends or watching TV, Jan was at the public library. He wasn't doing homework. He was teaching himself. He found books on computer networking, on programming languages, on how these new machines called computers actually worked. The Soviet Union hadn't prepared him for any of this. They didn't have personal computers. They didn't have the internet. But America had libraries, and libraries were free. And Jan spent hundreds of hours reading technical manuals, taking notes in broken English, teaching himself skills that most kids his age didn't even know existed. He'd stay until the library closed, then walk home in the dark, his head full of code and networks and possibilities. By 18, Jan had taught himself enough to get a real job. Ernst & Young, the massive accounting firm, hired him as an infrastructure engineer. Never got to see what he would become. She never got to know that her sacrifice mattered, that it worked, that her son would build something extraordinary. Jen was completely alone now. No family in America, no safety net. Just him, his skills, and a burning determination not to let his mother's sacrifice be for nothing. In 1997, before his mother got sick, Jan had gotten another job. Yahoo! The internet was exploding, and Yahoo was at the center of it, and they needed engineers who understood infrastructure. Jan became one of their specialists. For 9 years he worked at Yahoo. He learned how massive systems were built, how you could connect millions of users simultaneously, how to make things fast and reliable and simple. He was good at his job, really good. He learned from some of the smartest engineers in Silicon Valley. But he also learned something that bothered him. He watched Yahoo grow into a bloated corporation. Ads everywhere, user data collected and sold to advertisers. Privacy invaded at every turn. People's information tracked, analyzed, packaged, and sold. It reminded Jan of everything he'd escaped. The surveillance, the lack of privacy, the feeling that someone was always watching. Yahoo wasn't the Soviet government, but the principle was the same. They watched everything you did online and used that information for their own benefit. And Jan hated it. By 2007, Jan was burned out. He'd been working non-stop for a decade, carrying the weight of his parents' deaths, watching the internet he loved turn into something he didn't recognize. He quit Yahoo. No plan, no backup job, just walked away. He had some savings, not a fortune, but enough to live on for a while, and he needed to figure out what came next. His friend from Yahoo, Brian Acton, quit around the same time. They both applied to Facebook in 2007. Both got rejected. Facebook didn't think they were good enough. The irony of what would happen later makes that rejection one of the best things that ever happened to them. For 2 years, Jan traveled. He went to South America, played ultimate frisbee, thought about life, tried to figure out what he actually wanted to build. He wasn't in a hurry. He'd spent his whole life hustling, surviving, working. For the first time ever, he could just think. And in 2009, at 33 years old, he bought an iPhone. This device was revolutionary. The App Store had just launched, and Jan saw something nobody else was seeing. For the first time in history, a regular person could build software and distribute it to millions of users without needing a corporation, without needing permission, without needing anything except a good idea and the skills to build it. Jan started playing with app ideas. He built a few simple ones. They all failed. Nobody downloaded them. Nobody cared. But he kept experimenting, kept learning how iPhone apps worked, kept trying to find something that mattered. Then in January 2009, Jan was at a gym, and he noticed something. Everyone was constantly checking their phones. Not for calls, not for texts. Just checking, refreshing, looking. And Jan thought, what if there was a way to see what people were doing in real time? What if you could check your phone and see that your friend was at the gym, or your mom was at work, or your brother was busy? A simple status app. He registered the domain whatsapp.com, a play on the phrase "what's up." Simple, memorable. Exactly the kind of name that could work globally. He showed the idea to Brian Acton. Brian looked at it and said, "This is going nowhere. It's just a status app. Nobody's going to use this." But Jan built it anyway. He launched WhatsApp in February 2009. It was bare bones. Just a simple status updater. You could set your status, see your friends' statuses, and that was it. No messaging, no photos, no features, just status, and nobody used it. Barely anyone downloaded it. The few people who did download it never opened it twice. Jan watched his download numbers sit at a pathetic few hundred users total. Months passed, nothing changed. He'd spent months building this thing, spent his savings on development, and it was completely dead in the water. Most people would have quit. Most people would have moved on to the next idea. But Jan had learned something from sweeping floors at 16. When you start with nothing, failure doesn't scare you the same way. He didn't have anything to lose. So he kept watching, kept thinking, kept trying to figure out why it wasn't working. June 2009. Apple released push notifications for the iPhone. Suddenly apps could send you alerts even when they weren't open. Jan saw this and had an epiphany. He realized that WhatsApp didn't need to be a status app. It needed to be a messaging app. A way to send messages using internet data instead of expensive SMS texts. Phone companies charged 10, 20, sometimes 25 cents per text message. It was highway robbery, especially for people texting internationally. What if there was an app that let you message anyone in the world for free, just using your data connection? No phone company taking a cut. No per message charges, just simple, fast, free messaging. Jan completely rebuilt WhatsApp from scratch. He added messaging. He kept it brutally simple. No ads, no games, no social network features, no tracking, just messaging. Clean, fast, private. Everything he wished existed when he was a kid in Soviet Ukraine, where every phone call was monitored and privacy was survival. He launched WhatsApp 2.0 in late 2009, and slowly, very slowly, people started using it. His old Yahoo colleagues downloaded it. They told their friends. Their friends told their friends. Within months, he had thousands of users, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. People were discovering that they could text internationally for free. Immigrants could talk to family back home without paying $1 per message. Students could message friends without burning through their SMS limits. It was solving a real problem, and word was spreading. By 2011, WhatsApp was in the top 20 apps in the U.S. App Store. Jan brought Brian Acton on officially. They ran the company with an unusual philosophy for Silicon Valley. Stay small. Keep the team tiny. No ads, no data collection. They charged users $1 per year after the first year free. That was their business model, just an honest transaction. You pay $1, you get a year of unlimited messaging. No tricks, no surveillance, no selling your data to advertisers. Silicon Valley thought they were insane. Investors kept approaching them saying, "You're leaving billions on the table. Just add ads. Just collect user data. That's how you make real money." And Jan kept saying no. This wasn't about making the most money possible. This was about building something his mother would have been proud of, something that respected people, something that worked. By 2012, WhatsApp had 100 million users. By 2013, 200 million. Then 300 million. It was growing faster than any app in history. People in India were using it. People in Brazil, in Europe, in Africa. It was replacing SMS texting across the entire planet. It was saving people money, connecting families across borders, making communications simple and accessible. And it was making Jan Koum, the kid who swept floors for $5 an hour, very wealthy. Not billionaire wealthy yet, but successful enough that he never had to worry about money again. He'd kept his promise to his mother. He'd gotten them out of that food stamp line. She wasn't alive to see it, but he'd done it anyway. February 2014, Mark Zuckerberg had been watching WhatsApp's growth with increasing alarm. Facebook had its own messaging app, Facebook Messenger, but WhatsApp was crushing it internationally. WhatsApp had 450 million active users and was adding 1 million new users every single day. 1 million every day. It was a phenomenon, and it was completely independent of Facebook. Zuckerberg didn't control it, couldn't influence it, and that worried him. So he reached out to Jan Koum. They met for dinner, and Zuckerberg made an offer that took Jan's breath away. Facebook wanted to buy WhatsApp. The price? $19 billion. $16 billion in cash and Facebook stock, plus $3 billion reserved for WhatsApp employees. It was the largest acquisition of a venture-backed company in history. Bigger than Google buying YouTube. Bigger than Disney buying Pixar. This was unprecedented. Jan sat with the offer for days. $19 billion. The number was so large it didn't feel real. This was more money than his mother had made in her entire life by a factor of millions. This was more money than most people could even conceptualize. But there was something that bothered him. Facebook wanted him to sign the acquisition papers at their headquarters in Menlo Park, in their conference room, in their building. And Jan didn't want that. If he was going to sign this deal, if he was going to sell the company he'd built from nothing, he wanted to do it somewhere that meant something. Somewhere that reminded him why he'd built WhatsApp in the first place. He told Facebook's lawyers, "I'll sign the papers. But I'm signing them at 445 North Wisman Road in Mountain View." The lawyers were confused. They looked up the address. It was a government building. "What's there?" they asked. Jan smiled for the first time in days. "That's where I used to stand in line for food stamps." February 19th, 2014. Jan Koum walked into that old welfare office building in Mountain View. The same building where at 16 years old he had stood in line with his mother. Both of them embarrassed and desperate and hoping nobody they knew would see them. The same place where they'd received government assistance just to buy groceries. The same place where Jan had promised himself he'd make it out. Now, 18 years later, he was back, but everything was different. Facebook's lawyers were already there, looking uncomfortable and out of place in this government building. They laid out the paperwork on a table. Page after page of legal documents. Signatures required here and here and here. Jan picked up the pen. He thought about his mother, who never got to see this moment. His father, who died before Jan even started building something. The teenage version of himself who swept floors and studied in libraries because he had no other options. All of it led to this moment, this pen, this signature. He signed his name. Jan Koum. Just like that, he became one of the richest men in America, a billionaire several times over. Instant wealth beyond comprehension. And he'd done it in the exact spot where he'd once been at his absolute lowest point. The full circle of it, the poetry of it, wasn't lost on him. From food stamps to $19 billion, from Refugee to American success story. From the kid everyone overlooked to the man who built something used by 500 million people and growing. When reporters asked him later why he insisted on signing there, in that welfare office, Jan said something that captured everything. I wanted to remind myself where I came from. I wanted to stand in that building and remember what it felt like to have nothing. Because that place, that struggle, that's what made WhatsApp possible. If I'd had it easy, if my mother hadn't stood in that line, if I hadn't learned what it meant to have no privacy in Soviet Ukraine, I never would have built something that mattered. The struggle wasn't my obstacle, it was my education. Jan stayed with Facebook for a few years after the acquisition, but he never fit into their world. Facebook wanted to monetize WhatsApp, put ads in it, collect more user data, integrate it deeper into the Facebook ecosystem. Jan refused every time. That's not why he built WhatsApp. That's not what his mother would have wanted. That's not what the 16-year-old kid in the food stamp line had dreamed of building. In 2018, Jan left Facebook. He walked away from hundreds of millions of dollars in unvested stock options. Money that would have been his if he just stayed a few more years. But he didn't care about the money anymore. He cared about principles. He cared about building things the right way. And staying at Facebook meant compromising everything he believed in. So he left. Today, WhatsApp has over 2 billion users. It's the most popular messaging app on Earth. More people use WhatsApp than live in any single country except China and India. It connects families across oceans. It helps small businesses operate. It saves people billions of dollars in SMS fees every year. And it exists because a refugee kid from Ukraine, who swept floors and stood in food stamp lines, refused to give up. Refused to build something cheap. Refused to compromise his values even when everyone told him he was leaving money on the table. Jan Koum's story isn't really about the money, even though the money is staggering. It's about what he built and why he built it. Jan could have made WhatsApp like every other app. Filled it with ads, tracked user behavior, sold data to advertisers, maximized profit at every turn. He would have made even more money doing that, but he didn't, because he remembered. He remembered growing up in a place where the government listened to every phone call. He remembered his mother's fear, always looking over her shoulder, always careful about what she said. He remembered what it felt like to have no privacy, no freedom, no voice. And when he got the chance to build something, he built it with one principle above everything else: respect people's privacy. No ads, no data collection, no surveillance. Just simple, encrypted, private messaging that actually worked. That's the difference between someone building something for money and someone building something that matters. Jan wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to solve a problem he'd lived through. And because of that authenticity, because of that purpose, people trusted WhatsApp. They told their friends. They relied on it. They made it part of their daily lives. And it grew into something massive, not because of marketing or advertising or tricks, but because it was genuinely useful and respectful of its users. Here's what Jan Koum's story teaches us. Your struggle isn't your enemy. Your poverty, your rejection, your hardship, that's not what's holding you back. That's what's preparing you. Jan swept floors for minimum wage. He stood in food stamp lines. He taught himself to code in public libraries because he couldn't afford courses or college. He got rejected by Facebook before he built something Facebook desperately wanted to buy for $19 billion. Every single moment of struggle gave him something valuable. Sweeping floors taught him humility and work ethic. Food stamps taught him what it feels like to need help, which made him empathetic. The library taught him that he could learn anything if he was willing to work for it. Soviet Ukraine taught him the value of privacy in a way that Silicon Valley billionaires never understood. His mother's sacrifice taught him why purpose matters more than profit. All of it, every painful moment, every rejection, every time he felt like he wasn't enough, it all became part of the foundation for WhatsApp. Most people look at their struggles and think they're disqualified. They think, I'm too far behind, I'm too disadvantaged, I don't have the right background, I don't have the connections, I don't have the money, I'll never catch up. Koum looked at his struggles and thought something different. He thought, this is teaching me something nobody else knows. This is giving me a perspective that matters. This is showing me problems that need solving. And he was right. WhatsApp succeeded precisely because Jan understood something that the Stanford graduates and the venture capitalists and the Silicon Valley elite didn't understand. He understood that people want privacy. People want simplicity. People don't want to be the product. They want tools that work and respect them. That perspective came directly from his struggle. From growing up with nothing. From living through surveillance. From standing in food stamp lines. The struggle gave him vision. So if you're struggling right now, if you're broke, if you're working a job you hate, if you feel like you're years behind everyone else, if you're starting with nothing, remember Koum. Remember that at 33 years old, he was unemployed with no clear path forward. Remember that Facebook rejected him. Remember that his first version of WhatsApp completely failed. Remember that investors told him his business model was stupid. Remember that his mother never lived to see him succeed. Remember that he started with food stamps and ended with $19 billion. And remember that none of the success would have happened without the struggle. The struggle wasn't the problem. It was the preparation. Your story isn't over. Your current chapter, no matter how hard it is just setting you up for what comes next. The question isn't whether you'll face hardship. Everybody faces hardship. The question is what you'll do with the lessons that hardship teaches you. What problems will you notice because you've lived through struggle? What solutions will you build because you understand pain that comfortable people never see? What will you create that matters because you know what it feels like to have nothing? Koum built a messaging app that changed the world because he knew what it felt like to need privacy, to need connection, to need something simple that just worked. What are you going to build? 445 North Wisman Road in Mountain View, California. Most people drive past that building every day without thinking twice. It's just another small government office. But for Koum, that building represents everything. It represents the lowest point in his life and the highest. It represents where he had nothing and where he signed for $19 billion. It represents his mother's sacrifice and his own promise kept. It represents the full circle. From the kid standing in line waiting for food stamps to the man signing the biggest acquisition deal in Silicon Valley history. All in the same building. From refugee to billionaire. From floor sweeper to founder. From food stamps to Facebook's biggest acquisition. Koum proved something that a lot of people don't want to believe. He proved that your starting point doesn't determine your ending point, that your bank account doesn't define your potential, that your struggle doesn't disqualify you from success. Sometimes it's exactly what qualifies you. Sometimes the people who start with nothing are the ones who build something everybody needs, because they understand what it means to need. So the next time you're standing in line somewhere, feeling like you're at the bottom, feeling like everyone else is ahead of you and you'll never catch up, remember this story. Remember Koum. Remember that welfare office. Remember that signature. Because you're not at the bottom, you're at the beginning. And your WhatsApp, your big idea, your chance to build something that matters, it's waiting. It's waiting for you to learn what you need to learn, to see what you need to see, to become who you need to become. The struggle is just the first part of the story. The best part comes next, if you're willing to sign your name and make it happen. If this story hit you differently, if it changed how you see your own situation, hit that subscribe button right now. Because next week, I am bringing you the story of a woman who sold fax machines door to door, got rejected over and over, and then built a billion-dollar company from a $5,000 investment. She became the youngest self-made female billionaire in America, and how she did it will blow your mind. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll see you then.